All right, good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's our regular council meeting for November 14th. We're going to start tonight with a moment of reflection, after which we'll get into the approval of the agendas. So we'll start with a moment of reflection now. All right, thank you very much. Starting with the approval of the agendas, we have a consent agenda. Anyone wishing to pull anything from the consent agenda? If not, a motion to accept the consent agenda. Councillor Wolstenholme makes a motion to approve the consent agenda. I will call that to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Moving along to our regular meeting agenda. I have not heard of any requested changes from administration. If there's none from council, I'd request a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Fox makes that motion. Call to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. For the good of council, does anyone have something they wish to share with the whole of council regarding happenings, events, or highlights from the last couple weeks? I'd like to comment quickly on the Remembrance Day ceremonies. Thank you to the Legion in putting that on for us. Once again, it was a nice community opportunity to gather and remember those who have fought in our world wars before. And we appreciate them doing that for us. So thank you. Any other comments for the good of council? Councillor Monteith.
The Curling Club had their 125th a week or two ago. It was a very nice weekend, well attended, and everyone really enjoyed themselves. I would just note that town council tied for first in the indoor curling, lost in a shootout. We won't mention who shot. But well done to the Curling Club and putting that on. It was well done.
Very good. Anyone want to comment on the rodeo happenings? There's a couple of those. Or Councillor Henniger, do you want to comment?
I did not go to the rodeo, but it looked really fun all over social media. But I did have a comment on, and I'm going to do this every council, is our 150th is next year, June 28th to July 1st, and we're starting to plan and get sponsorships, and community groups are now coming forward saying we want to do this on that weekend, and most specifically, we'll be announcing our country singers that are coming to town probably in the next few weeks, but very exciting. And then as well as the Pioneer Lodge this Friday is doing an event from 4 till 7, and all the funds go back to seniors and their active living lifestyle. So please stop by and see them. That's what I had to say.
Very good. Any other comments for the good of council?
Last week, Friday, I attended the official groundbreaking. We didn't break any ground, but the groundbreaking for Structural Trust Systems and their partnership with the province. Obviously, a big thank you to the province for investing in the town of Fort Macleod, and congratulations to Structural Trust, among others, for that milestone and success in construction.
Right. Councillor Poitras.
Yes, Councillor Wolstenholme and myself were able to attend the Legacy of Our Land banquet. Big thanks to the MD for putting that on and for the invitation. And it was great to get out there and rub shoulders with our agricultural producers, and had a great evening. So.
And this weekend, I believe the firefighter ball. So I'm assuming it's probably sold out by now, or?
There is still lots of tickets available for anybody who wants to attend.
So anyone looking forward to coming out and supporting the firefighters, definitely look that up and come join the firefighters in their ball celebration. All right, if that is all, we'll move on tonight to, we have 2 public hearings, before which we will have a delegation, sorry. And we'll start with the delegation first, which is a presentation by Bob Gunn, and perhaps of Bob tonight. So we will ask Bob. Thank you. The floor is yours, Mr. Gunn.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Once again, on behalf of the Fort Macleod landowners and taxpayers located on the north side of the Oldman River, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the town of Fort Macleod Council for investigating this collective submission. This submission is a reasonable request to recognize and rectify the tax calculation inadequacies of the past. Without question, all landowners understand and accept our responsibilities to contribute to the assessment of a fair and reasonable tax rate. Our request has not changed. Annually, the taxes have increased. However, the absence of standard services exists, such as town water and sewage service, fire hydrants, street signs, sidewalks, adequate and consistent road signage, and irregular road maintenance. This further questions the accuracy of the tax rate being applied as presented at the Committee of the Whole meeting on 17 October. The facts have been presented for your favorable consideration. On behalf of the said landowners, we respectfully request the Council approve a more reasonable tax rate as described under the Municipal Government Act, Chapter M26, Section 297, Paragraph 2, which states, a council may, by bylaw, divide subclass 1 into subclasses on any basis it considers appropriate. And if the council does so, the assessor may assign one or more subclasses for the property in Class 1. This request is clear, substantiated, and warrants implementation of subclass assessment at a more appropriate reduced mill rate. Thank you for your time this evening and for council's and the town's administration team's exhaustive work in the forthcoming decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Did council have any clarifying questions for Mr. Gunn at this time? No? Okay. We will consider your presentation in the next agenda item under considerations of delegations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on, we have 2 public hearings tonight, and we will start with opening up bylaw 1976. And I believe our planner, Gavin Scott, will introduce this to us before we'll request a motion from council to open the public hearing. And then anyone wishing to speak for or against bylaw 1976 can do so at that time. So I'll first ask our planner, Gavin Scott, to introduce this bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening we have for your consideration at a public hearing bylaw 1976. First reading was had on October 10th with the advertising taking place in the Gazette the 18th and 28th of October. This is an ongoing long-term process which has been partially approved through subdivision with many conditions attached thereto. The reconfiguration of the environmental reserve was one of the conditions that needed to be satisfied through the process as outlined in the Municipal Government Act. This evening's public hearing is again on the municipal reserve portion of this subdivision, and the comments from the public, if there are any, should be focused on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm requesting a motion then from council to open the public hearing for bylaw 1976. Councillor Fox makes the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. I will this time ask anyone from the audience wishing to speak for or against bylaw 1976 to please come to the mic, state your name, for or against, and your case for it. If there is none, we will ask a second time and a third time. If no one's here wishing to speak for or against bylaw 1976, I will request a motion from council to close the public hearing for bylaw 1976. Councillor Fox makes that motion. Called question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Going on to the next public hearing, we have a community reserve removal of designation, and we will ask our planner, Gavin Scott from ORSC, to introduce this item to us as well.
From our October 10th meeting, first reading was done, public hearing was set for this date, and it was duly advertised in the Gazette at the 18th and 25th of October. This subject matter has to do with a community reserve that was put on a title back in the around 1960. Since then, a error was understood to be had at land titles where the town agreed to sell the property, but the community reserve designation was not removed at that time. So this is to clean up an error through land titles. Land titles has admitted that this should be done ahead of the landowner's desire to consolidate this property into their larger title.
Thank you for the introduction. I will ask for a motion from council to open the public hearing for this change of designation. Councillor Henniger makes the motion. Call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Anyone wishing to speak for or against the community reserve removal of designation? Anyone wishing to speak for or against the removal of this designation?
Is there a possibility you can explain what property it is? Because I do not exactly know what property it is.
And your name, sir? And your name, sir?
Theo Vanny.
Okay, so the property is country residential in the river bottom northeast of the water treatment plant. Dr. Bond's, near Dr. Bond's property. It's in the river bottom, out in the back country a little bit. It's a little, yeah, it's...
Sent an email about this before, but I'm not concerned about this particular property, but the property that's running right in front of my house, which I'd like to discuss.
Yeah, that would not be included
Up
in
in
this.
the next,
It would not be included in this one.
no.
Yeah. Oh. Correct. Yeah, Mr. Vanny, that bylaw 1976 that we just had a public hearing for is the one that you probably had interest in. Because that was adjacent to your property. Correct. Okay, thank you. All right, seeing there's no further comment for or against this community reserve removal, we'll ask for a motion to close the public hearing. Anyone wishing to make that motion? Councillor Wolstenholme makes that motion. Called the question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay, carrying on, we have a consideration of delegations and public hearings tonight. We will start tonight with a consideration of the delegation we heard regarding reducing taxes levied. And we will ask our CAO to present to council some comments along with our appraisal company. So I'll start, Anthony, if you can open this for us.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As was addressed today in the delegation and previously in a committee of the whole meeting, we're well aware of the request that's been made by the properties north of the river. Administration has done, quite a bit of work on this to try to get many resources and information possible to make sure that, the town is in the best situation to make the best decision, to make the best decision in regards to the community. So how I would like to kind of go about this evening, there's a number of different points that I would like to address and have some discussion with council, have some questions and comments, and we can go back and forth. Lance Wailagi, our assessor from Benchmark Consultants, is here with us today as well to be able to speak to anything as well. He also provided an official statement as part of our the resources that we gathered to, So we'll start at the beginning and then the end at the end, and hopefully we've got some good understanding and good conversation here. So as included in the package, which was made public in the agenda last week, here's some of the rationale or some of the information that administration was able to gather and understand. So we'll start with assessment considerations. So according to our assessor, Benchmark Consultant, the assessment of a home it does take into place the location of a home. It takes into place municipal infrastructure and services provided to that home because it is compared against like homes with similar services and similar infrastructure. And so what Lance shared with us at the previous meeting was any sort of adjustment to a tax rate would almost be like a second adjustment because the assessed value has a built-in adjustment. Now, it can be hard to visualize or to see this adjustment because if you live let's say if you live north of the river and perhaps Deer Path Meadows, you don't see a line that says minus X% gravel road, right? Minus this, no water and sewer. Those adjustments don't come out a line-by-line basis because the houses that you're comparing to are in like fashion in a similar situation. If one of those houses in a community like that did perhaps have, for some odd reason, had a paved road and a sidewalk and street lights up to it, it would then spell out some adjustments because the comparatives would be different. Am I correct? That's correct in my explanation? Excellent. I've been studying hard and long to make sure I understood that. And so how Lance had explained it to us and in further conversations, a few conversations, is, to adjust a tax rate, it would be sort of having a double adjustment. And so really understanding what makes up the assessment of a home and the comparatives to come to that assessment is a large part of this equation. And a home, let's say we take two similar homes of like size and, similar value as far as home construction goes, put one in town, in the middle of town on a paved road with a sidewalk and streetlights, put one out on a country residential area, the home in town could assess for $60,000, $70,000 more in value, even if the homes were identical. And so there is some built-in valuation differences that we would see just based on the location of a home. Is there anything I'm missing in that explanation, Lance?
Nothing to add. Yeah, I think you got everything.
Thank you. And I know you could have said that, but that was for me to make sure I really got it, right? To be able to explain that well. So that's the first point. The first point in kind of what we need to consider. The second point is the reality of living in a small town and the reality living in a lot of rural communities in southern Alberta is kind of the variability of infrastructure and services. Most communities in southern Alberta, in Alberta, probably across Canada, not every street is paved, not every service goes to every location. And so a difficulty there is if council was to adapt a rate that was specific for a specific group or a specific location, is we have a lot of specific groups, a lot of specific locations that don't all match. We have a variety of different country residentials. Some have access to water, some have wells, some, somewhat close to town might have a few country residential characteristics, but they still might be on the sewer system. And so there's a lot of differences that would make up, different types of homes to which, if council was to consider moving forward with accepting a special tax rate, it would be administration's, I guess, concern that every group who didn't have I have a sidewalk, I have a paved road, I'm hooked up to all of the town services, I have a street light in front of my house, perfect scenario, would then be entitled to a special tax rate. So just something to consider, because as we make decisions, as council makes decisions for the going forward in the community and setting up practices that are reasonable and rational, I think that would be a challenging situation to be in with different bodies requesting different rates. One thing that I do think is really important, and there's a lot of merit to the conversation or the requests that were made when it comes to the services received by our residents who are part of this request. The services that have been talked about have historically been roads. So, some north of the river are on a paved road, but it's the 811. It's not a town paved road specifically. But the roads, sidewalks, streetlights, the discussion of water and wastewater has also been brought up. Snow removal, dust mitigation, and those are all, those are all valid points. I just wanted to kind of touch base on a few of those points, just to kind of bring up some pieces of, to kind of bring to light some of the things that we should be considering. So as far as the paved roads and sidewalks, approximately 23% of the municipal budget goes towards roads and streets and sidewalks. A lot of that does go towards, maintenance, dust mitigation. There's a lot that our budget goes to maintaining roads, streets, and sidewalks. And I think one thing that is a valid argument is the maintenance of those roads out there could be improved. And I think this last year there was some demonstration that, the dust mitigation practices were there, and I think it made a big impact on that area. And our previous director of operations did a good job at implementing policies to make sure that services were more consistent, and it wasn't on a complaint basis or whenever we got to a basis, but that there was a normal schedule for things like gravel road maintenance and dust abatement. So I do think that, as a council and administration, we can use more of our 23% of our budget to maintaining roads in all sectors of town, and that's an important piece of this equation as well. As far as when it comes to water and wastewater services, those services operate on a user-funded basis. And so those who use those services are charged for them. And the way that it's supposed to be designed is that the service charge and the money that comes in is supposed to support the system that is delivering those services. So to not be hooked up to water, the costs aren't there. And so that piece of the argument, there's a little bit less to be had there, because with those connections, there would just be the added cost anyway. And so it's not necessarily something that comes on a property tax. And I like to keep the property tax side of the equation and the water services separate, because of the costs associated and the user-funded kind of nature of the water, waste and drinking water and wastewater services. The other piece, there's been some discussion about snow clearing, and we think that could be improved out there. And I already mentioned dust abatement. But all in all, as far as the services go, we do believe that we are moving in the right direction when it comes to providing better and adequate services for these properties, so that they have, and we do want them to feel like they are being served and that they do have some value for the taxes that they pay and the place that they live. And so that is something that administration is focusing on. The next piece is kind of, so we started doing our homework a little bit into what neighboring municipalities are doing. So included in your package is a spreadsheet put together. It's very nice. Miranda made it nice and pretty for us. It's a spreadsheet that identifies a number of local municipalities. And I'll just list through the municipalities that we took a look at. Cardston, Claresholm, Colehurst, Crossfield, Diamond Valley, Hanna, McGrath, Nanton, Penhold, Picture Butte, Pincher Creek, Raymond, Sundre. We also included Lethbridge, Okotoks, High River, and the MD of Willow Creek, the MD of Pincher Creek, and Cardston County. So what we were looking for here is we were looking for what everyone else was charging for, what their tax rates were, or what they are, and what sort of categories they have in their tax rates to see if something like this had been done, has been done for a specific location or for a group, perhaps with different services. What we found was that out of these municipalities, or out of any, I think there were 18 here, municipalities, actually I'll just go through the categories to kind of explain what they are so we can get a full breadth of the different types of tax rates that are charged. So most municipalities have a residential, sometimes they say residential/farmland, but residential, right? That's where, where people are living. A couple municipalities did have a separate group for multifamily, which usually would be because they are charging a higher rate because they have a higher usage of the system, in which case they do. In Lethbridge, it's a much higher rate. There's a non-residential, which is usually for all your business, your industrial, typically gathers all that. That's what our rate gathers in, and that's very standard across the board. Everyone has a non-residential rate. Some of the special categories or unique categories are vacant lands. So some municipalities will charge less for vacant lands, others will charge more for vacant lands to encourage people to develop those lands. For example, Nanton charges 23% on vacant land as opposed to their 11% on non-residential. So really encourages people to get to use that land. A number of municipalities has a machinery and equipment tax rate. Yeah, obviously that's pretty self-explanatory. Then there are a handful that have a linear tax rate. And after that, we have a small business tax incentive, which I guess that only exists in Nanton as well. And then the one piece that I think is closest, closest to what we're talking about here, potentially is annexed lands. And this is the piece of the conversation that I have had with a few other CAOs, that if the town of Fort Macleod was in our current location and we annexed a quarter section to the east, west, south, and north, and there were houses that already existed in there and were paying municipal or the MD of Willow Creek property taxes, which is a different rate than ours. Many municipalities will have an adjusted rate for a set period of time so that, from one day to the next, their taxes don't change. But if the user was to change or after a certain number of years, then it gets rolled over into the tax rate that the rest of the community has. And that's, there's a few categories within that: annexed, farmland, residential, non-residential. And so one thing that we learned from this study, right, from this exercise of going through all these different rates, the first piece is that unless a group was kind of part of an annexed piece of land, to have a certain neighborhood or a certain services, really that doesn't exist. So for the town of Fort Macleod, for example, if you were going to tie it to something, really you'd want to tie it, like here, it'd be a zoning thing, right? It would be more of a zoning thing, right? Because you've got multifamily would be zoning, non-residential machinery and equipment would be zoning. It would be tied to a zoning piece. And then so you're probably looking at creating a new zoning, or it's tied to all of our country residential zoning. And And that's what's historically been done and what is being done in our neighboring municipalities. And there have been some comments about, oh, we could be the first, to which I would be cautious in doing new and exciting things when it comes to creating new ways to charge taxes or to change the amounts taxed. I think we should definitely use the resources around and see what is being done, even by the bigger centers, Lethbridge, Okotoks, High River, as examples to what the town should be doing as well. The last point that I have is, in this exercise as well, we obviously are taking a look at the tax rates, because that's what this really boils down to, is what the rate that this group of residents is being taxed feels like it is undue. It's too large. And if you take a look at the spreadsheet, Fort McLeod's residential tax rate is 5.809002. There's only one community in the under 5,000 that has a lower tax rate than us. The other tax rates for Cardston, 7.1, Colehurst, 7.49, Crossfields is the lower one at 5.72, so just a smidge lower. Diamond Valley, 7.05, Hanna, 11.01, McGrath, 7.1, Nanton, 8.48, Picture Butte, 7.04, Pincher Creek, 9.27, Raymond, 8.41, and Sundre, 7.60. So just our tax rate alone and the services that are provided at that tax rate, I would say speak volumes to the value that all of our residents get for the taxes that we pay here in Fort McLeod. And I think that is a big piece of this discussion as well. So those are the pieces of information that administration was able to research into and talk to. I have spoken to dozens of CAOs about this as well, and they have the same opinion as myself that I would recommend against this as administration and from an administrative or administration's perspective, just given the points that I brought forward today. And I guess last point is, obviously this is a council decision, not an administration decision, but yeah, I'm open to questions and discussion on the matter.
Thank you very much. Was Lance speaking to this as well from Benchmark? Or just here for questions?
I mean, he provided his statement, and yeah, if we have questions, he can speak to it as well. But
Is there anything you wanted to clarify from Anthony's comments, Lance, before
No,
we...
it was hit all the points.
Okay.
Nothing to add to it, yeah.
Okay,
But open to any questions if.
okay, very good. So I'll open it to the floor for council. Does anyone want to start with questions for administration? I think tonight the goal is to obviously hear the discussion. Council has had a discussion in a committee of the whole. If at any point council would like to defer this to a future council meeting for further investigation or decision, that is totally within our realm as well. So we can do that, or we can have some more discussion now. Does anyone have questions for administration on any of this? Or anyone wishing to make a motion, I guess. I did have a couple questions myself, and I know I was not at the committee of the whole and did not have an opportunity to connect much with administration on this myself. The one question I did have, if a similar property that's in, for example, Deer Path Meadows, was across the road in the MD, how would taxes compare? And I think that's some of the discussion that I was kind of wrestling with myself, because the services, in a sense, would be the same on one side of the road as the other, based on where they're located. So that was, I know we can't always compare that way, but on the other hand, I don't know the history of those lands. I think they were annexed at one point. I'm not sure how far back. Does anyone know that?
we can find that out. Obviously, the lands were developed after they were part of the town of Fort Macleod.
Yeah.
And so,
Yes, absolutely.
so that wouldn't fit the definition of the other annexed zones. It's typically a tax rate given to those they were annexed, right? As they were once this resident and now they're this resident.
The other question I had is, bottom line, I believe that the concern of the residents in that area is the lack of service over the last number of years. Whether it's signage, whether it's grading of the roads, clearing of the roads with snow. I think it was only recently that we started looking at that more, even with the blue signs and so on. Some of the language in the presentation is that we could do better. Is there anything from the town size that says we will be doing better?
If you would to see, well, let me see how I wrote it actually. Sorry, getting used to these new packages. Yeah, and so my recommendation, as I stated, was that, like I said, I was against the specific group, but that we also commit to supporting these properties with improved service levels. Obviously, we're not going to get into the details of the service levels in this motion, but commit to improving the service levels there.
Okay. Any other thoughts from council? Questions? Debate? Or motion, I guess, debate.
I have some thoughts, and specifically that this is a request north of the river. If the request may be, the concerns may be valid, but the concerns would apply to other parts of the community that, in my mind, this becomes more of a class discussion if it does actually become a discussion around country residential, which is not the question on the floor today, which would actually rule me out as a owner of country residential. But there's one thing here that wasn't mentioned by CEO Anthony, and that is there is a significant number of these properties in particular that have non-residential applications or uses of their property. And currently, those non-residential applications are being billed or taxed at a residential mill rate. The residential mill rate is 5.8. The non-residential mill rate is 11.2. So we have some sizable properties and structures on these properties that, if they were found on 12th Street, they would be considered commercial or industrial. And those properties on 12th Street are currently being billed at 11.26% mill rate as a commercial or industrial use. These properties that have these buildings or shops on them are being billed at a 5.8. So that doesn't apply to all of the properties north of the river, but there are a significant amount of properties that do have these applications, and they're part of this group. So it's one reason. It's not applicable to all, but it is a reason why these properties are already having a significant tax break due to them, through MPC and through possible exemptions, receiving the ability to build within that land use of country residential facilities that are currently being used for business or commercial applications. So I'm not opposed to a conversation at another date. I'm not opposed to being the first to do something different. But at this point, I feel this isn't just, if it were a conversation, it wouldn't just be a north of the river conversation. I think there would be I think Linden Road and possibly airport acreages might want to join the conversation if that were to become an actual conversation. But at this point, that's not on the floor. So just my thoughts, not necessarily a question.
Okay, very good. In my opinion, I think we need further study before we can deny the request, personally. That's my opinion at this point. If anyone would agree with that, then we can request a motion to defer the decision to a future council meeting. If not, then someone can introduce a motion as per the recommendation, and then council can debate on it one way or the other on that. Is anyone prepared to make a motion that we can put to the floor?
I'm wondering what sort of more information you would get. that you want, that we don't have?
Yeah, for sure. I think a healthy discussion with residents north of the river on what their expectations are long-term would be helpful. Like, is the expectation in the long-term future that we do bring water to the north side of the river? Is there more interest in whether it's pathways or something? Because if that's the interest, then the town needs to consider that when they're making a decision like this. And maybe instead we build a reserve account that we can start investing into, so that when that time comes, we have a fund built to fund such infrastructure.
That sounds like not a bad idea, but I think what the Councillor Van Hugenbos said, it has to be the whole town, not just north of the river.
Well, right now, I believe any community south of the river has a lot more current opportunities when we're building infrastructure, whether it's water. You look at even airport properties, for example, a new water line went to there and improves the value of the properties. You wouldn't have that north of the river currently. So I still, in my opinion, I still think there's a distinction between north and south based on where it's located. Councillor Monteith?
There's a significant subdivision north of the river that was developed by a developer who sold the land based on no pavement, no sidewalks, no whatever, and presumably that was built into the price of the land when landowners bought it. So I have real trouble with saying that it should be valued less, because obviously what they paid for the land is less than it would have been if it was fully developed. So there's a lot of things I think we need to look at, and I'm in favor of defeating the motion, but looking at the issue further for the whole town, not just for north of the river.
Councilor Van
I agree with Councillor Monteith on that aspect, and here's a few other points to consider. It specifically asks for council to consider how taxes are being levied for these properties. So that's the question. We have the ability to answer that question, to either approve it or deny it. To get additional information is something we are obligated to do. To service these properties is something we're obligated to do. And I think that's where these residents should lobby their council to some degree on making sure that happens. And I'm willing to give out the mayor's phone number here. No, I'm just kidding. I won't do that. But the problem we run into is there's a lot of discrepancy in services. That's what the CAO mentioned. And if we now open up this discussion by approving this, we're going to have 8th and 9th Street knocking on the door based on lack of sidewalks, lack of this, lack of that. Now we're looking to increase those parts of town, but currently for the last 20, 30, well, they've never had sidewalks. So that's a valid conversation, right? But I do believe that the properties are assessed according to what's there, and that it's not a flat method of assessment. That's also been discussed. So I just have, I guess I understand the request, but the only way I look at this is as a whole, where we bring all aspects of the community, the differences of country residential as a class into the discussion, instead of breaking out essentially a subclass into a smaller class. Like, there's no community that has a subclass of the 18. And now for us to create a sub of a sub, that's not how we would start this conversation. So I would be in favor of denying this and having a serious look at this with additional information going forward.
Okay, so bottom line, we need a motion on the floor that council can debate. Anyone prepared to make a motion regarding this submission?
Motion to deny as per the recommendation.
Okay. Motion to deny the request has been made. Any further discussion or debate? Councillor Henniger?
I know we can't talk about service improvements and those specifics tonight, but I guess just on an administration and I'm looking back at the big fire in my brain of when we passed garbage and recycling and numbers were in front of us, and that was a big reason in my very first council meeting of making a decision that caused a lot of community flood. Yeah, it was not a fun time. But I just want to know from an administration standpoint and with council, if we are denying this motion today and we are engaging with residents that have put through this information, what does that look like for community engagement after this point? If it denies today, what does that look like? What would you forecast? Is that sitting down with a group? Is that having a community engagement evening? Because if we're talking providing and enhancing our services, we're also going through this transition period where we're getting a brand new director of operations, hopefully, and we're talking budgets in the next month. I'm just wondering, how are you going to engage with people? And if you've had any thought to that.
Thank you. Anthony?
Thank you, Councilor Henniger. So we are hopeful to have an engagement evening for a number of the items that we're currently dealing with. As many as council knows, we often run open houses that have 6 people attend. And so this would be one of the items on the agenda, right? Almost like a fair type of communication event. And so we'd be hopeful to have those conversations. With this group, it's actually very easy to get feedback at the very least because we have a list of names, we have a list of emails. And so finding out what specifically is most important to them. It doesn't mean we can grant all the wishes on the wish list, but understanding what is the most pertinent issues that they're dealing with, where have they seen, you know, even requesting information is like, how well was the dust abatement received last year, right? You know, did they feel like that was a fair use or a valuable use of resources? And so, yeah, we would specifically reach out, given the email listings that we have in the context that we have, but also, like council said, because this is it's a whole town thing. You know, having these conversations with people who are, you know, on kind of the edges of town, who have different services in our kind of communications fair that we intend to have in the next year.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilor Poitras?
Yeah, I just have a question more on clarification on procedure here. So we have a motion on the floor, and if this motion is defeated, that does not mean that the request is approved, correct?
That was going to be my clarifying question as well. If this is defeated, does that mean that council cannot do a reduction in tax if after a bunch of discussion we decide that we want to again?
No, council has the power to change their mind. But I mean, yeah, if the recommendation was accepted as administration has put it forward to deny this application, it doesn't stop council in the future making changes to groups or property taxes or no, just this specific request would be denied, and perhaps a new or different request comes forward in the future. Yeah, it could be discussed as well.
Councilor Poitras, was that your question? Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of maybe double negatives going on here. Deny the deny. So I am in favor of discussing this more. And so the motion now is to defeat the application. So if the motion is defeated, then does that mean we can still discuss this present request?
We can always ask for friendly amendments to request the mover of the motion to add a component where we can bring it up with council for further discussion and consultation.
Okay, but the application, the ask is specific. The ask does not in any way tie our hands to bring forward a mill rate bylaw at any given time. We have the ability to create a subclass. This is a request from a delegation. I see no other strings attached to this on an MGA side of things. We have the ability to essentially create a subclass and then set a mill rate for that subclass through a mill rate bylaw, correct? So we can always do that. So at this point, I think we've heard the concern, and it would be amiss of us to not acknowledge the concern and to not bring this forward into our strategic planning by adding north of town to our snow route clearing bylaw to some degree, right? Like, let's put them on
I
there.
think that was the kind of the ask. We don't want this to go dead after tonight. Would you be willing
Agreed.
to add that to your motion?
Absolutely, I would.
Okay.
Yeah. If that we
So to deny
instruct,
the request and commit to further discussion with administration and residents as required. Is that, yeah. Any clarification required on the motion? Any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. That was a little bit lengthy, but we got through it. Moving on then to the public hearing we had on bylaw 1976, an environmental reserve boundary adjustment. And this was presented to us by our planner, Gavin Scott, earlier. And we would, anyone wishing to make motion for second reading on this bylaw? Councillor Monteith makes the motion for second reading. Any further discussion or questions on bylaw 1976? It's to change a reserve boundary along, sorry, let me get to the road name. Along Linden Road. If there's no further discussion or debate, I'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion for second reading has been carried. I will request a motion for third reading from council. Councillor Henniger makes a motion. Motion for third readings on the floor. Anyone wishing to speak for or against on the third reading? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion to pass bylaw 1976 has passed. Moving on then to community reserve removal of designation, and that was presented to us earlier as well. And tonight we are requesting, let me get back to, really I believe the motion tonight is to notify the register and request to remove the designation form from the lands. And anyone wishing to make that motion? Councillor Fox makes the motion as per the recommendation. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Right, so that was not a bylaw, so it did not require a second or third reading. All right, moving on then to unfinished business. We have Canadian history, EHX, and we'll ask our Director of Community Services, Lisa Gillingham, to introduce this to us.
Thank you and good evening, Council. In the spring, we had Craig from Canadian History X present on his podcast series and the ability to create podcasts for communities. At the time that it was presented, we did not have our full marketing budget allocated yet and know exactly where we were going to end up. But as we near the end of the year, we have some room left in that budget, and administration would like to move forward with this because it is already in the budget. We're not necessarily needing an approval from council. We're just providing the feedback and bringing it back to council that they had asked for at the time. So unless there's any sort of change in council's desire to have that podcast created for Fort Macleod, we will work within the budget that's left to have that done, and we're just waiting to hear back from Craig and finalize and get things set.
Very good, thank you very much. Anyone prepared to make a motion to accept as information? Councillor Henniger makes the motion. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on to new business, we have a bylaw 1977 for a road closure, and we'll ask our planner, Gavin Scott, to introduce this to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bylaw 1977 is a road closure in relation to the subdivision that was described earlier regarding the environmental reserve. This is the Daisy Mead Campground frontage. It is recommended for first reading, and the description is 21st Street Plan 1582 HB containing 1.66 hectares. All portions of the road plan 3707L forming part of the plan, and that portion of the road on plan 8790GR forming part of the plan, accepting all mines and minerals. Recommendation to advertise for the public hearing to be held on the date yet to be determined once the circulation to the utility companies occurs. Then we would move forward with a second, third reading. Now, I am aware, I'm going to break from tradition here. I'm aware that Mr. Theo Van Ee is here to speak to this issue. This is a first reading and it's not a debatable item. Mr. Van Ee is adjacent here with a similar road that he wishes to have closed. This process has been devised without him in it, and it is his concern that his road isn't being closed. Prior to this, there was a lot of debate whether or not this should be closed, and it was determined by the previous director of operations that it could be closed. And it was during this process that that was done. Now, when a road closure happens, it is sold. This is a sale to an individual landowner. Mr. Van Ee, I believe, should write a letter to the town requesting that his portion be closed, and we run a similar process for him. This process is going forward as devised, and there's nothing to be done to be changing it at this juncture. But that's not to say that he doesn't have a path to go forward. Just make the request, and we'll get that moving for him.
All right, thank you very much. Bylaw 1977. Anyone wishing to make a motion for first reading in the advertising of a public hearing? Councillor Henniger makes the motion as per the recommendation. Any further discussion or questions on this bylaw at this point? Everything is clear. If there is no discussion or questions, I will call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? The motion for bylaw 1977 to go to a public hearing has been passed. All right, we will move on to bylaw 1978, which is another road closure, and we'll ask again our planner, Gavin Scott, to introduce this to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bylaw 1978 is a road closure put forward this evening for first reading with the intent to close the road to travel for those portions as shown in the mapping, and this is in pursuant of the McLeod Landing Area Structure Plan. So as that process needs to get moving for subdivision, part of that process will be to begin with the road closure as the roads are redefined. And in that mapping, you'll see that there is an alley as well as a portion of 8th that is being closed. So once again, we have a portion of Plan 961-1915, Plan 991-1458, and thirdly, a portion of 001-2301. And recommendation for a public hearing to be set after the circulation happens to the utility companies.
Very good. I will now request a motion from council to for first reading of bylaw 1978 and to advertise for public hearing. Councillor Poitras makes that motion. Any questions for administration on this bylaw? Councillor Van Hagebos?
It's not necessarily on the bylaw, but it's on the subject of the bylaw. Have you heard back from Alberta Transportation on the study we're looking for before we get the subdivision?
For the GIA?
Correct.
No. The engineers, touched base with the engineers recently, and they were kind of taking the lead on keeping tabs on that in absence of our director of operations.
Okay, thank you.
I did have a question on some of the lands that are going to be closed for road. Does the town have plans on what to do with some of those lands, specifically the ones that wrap around the current Dairy Queen?
The pathways that go behind the current Dairy Queen. There was discussion about having that piece tie into like some pathways and some walkways, because it won't be passable by vehicular transport. So that's nothing set in stone at this point, but that's kind of the idea. Have some pathway back there.
Yeah, my question, yeah, it's quite visible land, so we want to make sure it's tidied up and organized well. So bylaw is on the floor. Any further questions, discussion? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, moving on to the fun stuff. Year-to-date operational reports. Our Director of Finance, Chris Holbeck, would like to present her report.
Good evening, Council. Thank you. Tonight is our normal quarterly report on the year-to-date operationals. Lots of things can change before the end of the year. There's still a couple months left, expenses, revenues. So I've presented the operational report with all the numbers and some comments in it, just some things that I think Council should consider as you're flipping through it. Normally we don't go through this page by page because it's a little cumbersome and tedious sometimes. And I know when I get to the end of the operational report, the mayor always asks, what's our surplus going to be this year, Chris? And I always duck and cover and say, we're doing just fine. I'm not going to give you any numbers. I'm not going to I'm not going to guess. Prognosticate. That's the word I was going to use, my $3 word. I think probably the two biggest things for council to understand when you get to the last page of this report and there's a large surplus is that large surplus contains the debenture proceeds for 50% of the McLeod Landing subdivision. So that surplus has $3.1 million of financing in it that gets pulled out. That wasn't revenue. That's going to pay for half of that McLeod Landing subdivision as we go forward. The second thing for council to remember is that we had quite positive land sales this year, thanks to our chief administrative officer and our development officer and our realtors. So we have on page 20 of 27 is our land sales. And in our budget, our operational budget, we budget to move all of the net surplus from land sales into our reserves. So currently, as this report shows, we have about $1.2 million in surplus from land sales this year. That could change before the end of the year. There could be more land sales, there could be more expenses, but that number has been budgeted to move directly into reserves. So that's got to be factored out of that large surplus at the end of this report. Other than that, we're having a great year. Very exciting. Lots going on in the town. We're staying within our budget numbers. There's some highs and some lows, but they're all explainable. And I put any comments that I thought were interesting into the report for council. And if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I think what I was looking for is that you were happy, and I think you mentioned that, so I think we're good. Yeah, you're happy. All right, any questions for our Director of Finance? Councillor Monteith.
So if you take the debenture out and land sales out, we're breaking even. Does that make sense?
You have to add back in amortization, Jim.
Okay.
So I didn't do any adjustments. I didn't try to, because once I start down that path of adjust this and adjust that, and then I want to adjust a whole bunch of things, and then the estimate gets worse and worse as it goes. So I'll go with your premise that we're breaking even. I think we have a surplus, but it's not a big it won't be a big surplus by the end of the year, I'm sure.
For the record, Councillor Monteith asked that question. All right, no further questions? Councilor Van Hagenbos?
What portion of the debenture is coming out in this year?
So we haven't, I think all we've spent on that, all we've spent on the project so far is engineering costs. So normally that amount will come through in the financial statements as being used from the debenture, but we don't have a director of operations, so Anthony can jump in here, but I'm pretty sure that McNally has gotten the first contract on this, and we're doing underground. And according to the engineers, they've estimated that we will be using, the project cost for this year will be $1 million. And then the rest of the $6.2 million project will all be spent next year. So it's about $1 million. And we're funding half of that with a debenture, and the other half is coming out of our internal financing reserve.
Councilor Monteith?
So does that mean out of the $1 million, half comes out of our reserves and half comes out of the debenture? Or does it all come out of the debenture first?
I like to spend the debenture first because it's our money. We borrowed it. We're paying the interest on it. So I always use the debenture money first. It's really just an accounting, Jim. It's just accounting. It's numbers. But I always use the reserve first and then start pulling out of, I use the debenture first and then I start pulling out of reserves when we spent all the money that's in the debenture. But it's all a big pot of money right now.
Councilor Van Hagenbos?
Seeing as the first phase of the project, the underground came in significantly under budget, does that mean it won't be 50-50 between reserves and debenture? Seeing as you use debenture first, it'll be more of a 60-40?
You're getting way ahead of the game.
If that's the way the entire project runs, no change orders, no cost increases, yeah, that's the way it'll be. It'll be a 60-40 or a 55-45.
No stoplights, no intersection improvements. All right, so information's been presented. If there's no further questions, a motion to accept this information. Councillor Henniger makes the motion. Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
You are welcome. And moving on to municipal indicator results, and our CAO would like to brag.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The municipal indicator results, we did bring them forward last year, and I don't know if we historically did, but when they came in last year, I thought it was great to bring them forward for Council's knowledge and for the public's as well. So more or less, this is a municipal report card. I'll share the description here. Alberta Municipal Affairs annually reports a performance measure that identifies the percentage of municipalities deemed to not face potential long-term viability challenges based on their financial and governance indicators. This performance measure is used as a benchmark for measuring the ministry's efforts to ensure Albertans live in viable municipalities and communities with responsible, collaborative, and accountable local governments. So more or less, this is a report card to see with a few key indicators, a few key areas to make sure that communities are doing okay. It doesn't say that we're doing great, but it says that we do not face potential long-term viability challenges. Getting into some double negatives there. But Fort Macleod, for this last year, for 2022, we came through with solid greens, with a solid pass. No areas of concern by the provincial government, which was fantastic. Just for Council and for those here and listening, a few of the areas would be if our auditors had a concern with our audit. One area that I thought was interesting is if a lot of people aren't running for public office, that's a concern. So we had 4. Would that be 4? That would have been our last election. Okay, I was gonna say that wasn't our by-election. And so other things, whether we would get our financial reporting in on time, what's our accumulated surplus, what percentage of taxes we collect. We're currently 96.98% of our taxes are collected. Our tax base balance, Population growth, if you're significantly declining, that's obviously a concern for the province. Yeah, and obviously some financial indicators, debt service to revenue, debt to revenue percentage, and our current ratio. So it's always just a great little moment to focus in that we're doing okay. We're not on the radar for anything bad. We're doing great. So it's a recommendation that council accepts this as information.
Very well. Councillor Monteith?
The information's fine, but does it give any comparability to other centers to see where we sit?
It doesn't give us a table with everyone else in it, at least I didn't find it, but we can look up every other municipality in the province. I mean, we won't name any names, but we found a few neighbors, you know, that might have had 1 or 2 red marks, but yeah, so we can see where other people are for sure. I would like it in one nice table so we could kind of run some more analysis, but useful information.
Thank you. Motion to accept this information. Councillor Monteith, is there any other questions on the information provided? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. We have no administrative reports today. Our next order of business is an in-camera item, and we'll ask for a motion from council to go in camera for one intergovernmental relations item. Councillor Poitras makes a motion. Call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. All right.